with us. We have Jacinto Ramos, Ashley Paz, and Ann Dar. Lone Star governance is something that the board has adopted, and this is a great opportunity for you to ask questions and learn more about this. At any time throughout the presentation, you can put a question in the chat. We will have an opportunity for question and answer after the presentation. So with that, I would like to introduce President Jacinto Ramos to just give us a couple things about yourself, and we'll just go individually from there.
Okay, well, good evening. Saludos. My name is Jacinto Ramos Jr., school board trustee for District 1 and current board president. I've served on the board for 8 years, going to be almost 8 years, and looking forward to the next 4. So good to be with all of you.
My name is Ashley Paz. I am the District 9 trustee for the Fort Worth School Board. I've served on the board for almost 8 years as well, and I'm actually finishing up my final term on the board here in the next few weeks as the voters are deciding who will be their next trustee for District 9. So it's a bittersweet time for me, but I'm excited about this conversation with you all this afternoon, whatever time it is.
Hi, my name is Ann Dar, and I represent District 6. I am about to complete my 2nd year on the board, and I am excited to spend this next hour with you. So thank you for being with us, and thank you for taking time out of your evening, because I know that you have valuable things to do with your time as well. So we're going to start off. If you'll move to the next slide, Jennifer.
Great, so we're going to jump right in. Ms. Dar will be starting us off with the first slide. So Ms. Dar, I'll pass it on to you.
Okay, thank you very much. This is just an outline of what we're going to talk about today. And this is everything we're discussing this evening is related to the Lone Star governance model. So the 4 topics are: what is Lone Star governance, Fort Worth ISD and how we are implementing in Fort Worth ISD Lone Star governance, the role of the school board, and then also the Fort Worth ISD student outcome goals. So in general, our purpose for today is to share information about Lone Star governance with our stakeholders, and also to discuss how Fort Worth ISD is focusing on Lone Star governance in order to improve student outcomes, because the students should always be at the center of our focus. If you'll move to the next slide, Jennifer. Thank you. I'll pass it to my colleague, President Ramos.
Okay, I'm going to apologize if my internet is shaky. I'm hearing some cracking of voices here. So Lone Star governance, as my colleague Trustee Dar has described, it's coming through the state of Texas, through the Texas Education Agency. But I will also note, as I did last night, that this actually came by way of our colleague Ashley Paz, who's an executive team member of the Council of Great City Schools. She, by the way, is also cited on the material on the front page of it. So I recall the day when she came and said, hey, we ought to be focusing on student outcomes. And I was like, yeah, I know, like I want to fix football, I want to fix mariachi, I want to fix parent engagement. And it took a while for me to really understand what this language that Ashley was speaking, that she was bringing with her from the national level. So really, it's as Trustee Dar said, it is shifting from a wild, wild west approach of board members that come in with our own individual agendas, which typically are connected to campaign promises that are made, topics that relate to single member district or even at large districts. But it's what promises that I make to people on the campaign trail. That in and of itself creates it creates hardships in a boardroom working with a team when 9 of us, for example, in Fort Worth, that have made probably 9 different sets of promises to constituents, really won't create the space for us to focus on student outcomes if we don't outright say we're going to focus on student outcomes. So it's an unapologetic approach to be able to do that, and it is done in coalition and collaboration with the superintendent. So we'll go to the next slide. And so instead of reading this right here, I'm going to try to bring this to life. The Fort Worth ISD and Lone Star Governance, when we embarked, we did this January of 2017. 8 of the 9 of us were able to be in attendance along with other board members around the state. And we're introduced to this new language, this new vocabulary. What was governance? Why is it important? And what we learned pretty quickly, it's that with 9 different board members with 9 different agendas, we weren't going to be able to get to a student outcomes focus without a framework. And so the analogy I used last night is the same I'll use today. In the governance world, we can think of school board members in essence trying to be the ones that order the Lyft or the Uber for a ride. We as board members get to say where we want to go. We can maybe even change the routes if we want. But the main thing that we agree on is that when the Uber or the Lyft vehicle pulls up, board members do not get into driver's seat. The driver's seat in essence is the superintendent's role. We get in the passenger side, we get in the back of the vehicle. So we have dictated where we want to go, which is where the goals come into play. If the superintendent wants to change the route because it's going to get her a fastest and a more economic route, then they should be able to have the flexibility to do that, as long as we get to the outcome, to the goal that we want. The problem is if we tried to tell the Uber, Lyft driver where to go, and we try to get in the driver's seat, that's when things really get sticky. And so talking about a board member's role is very different for me now than it was back in 2013 when I first ran. Thinking of terms of constraints of what my colleague Ashley and Ann will be able to articulate as well, is what are those landmines within a school culture? Are there areas of our school system that we ought to be telling the superintendent, please don't do this and please don't do that? And that varies from district to district. And then also constraints for the board. Are we going to have a true commitment to student outcomes? Are we going to have a true commitment to spending at least 50% of our time on focus on student outcomes? Or are we going to do a lot of pretending? And one of the favorite terms that I have in this work that comes to the board self-evaluation is to remove what we call common pretending, where I as one trustee will blame all of my other colleagues for us not meeting our goals. So there is this term saying that I am the genesis of transformation, that I am willing to embrace my positional power, my influence, that I can create change within this governing team. And so trying to bring this to life a little bit, but that's in essence why governance was new for me. It's not something that I learned about. It's not something I was well versed in. And so trying to figure out how to navigate with 8 other amazing human beings and a superintendent, that's a full-time gig as well. We can go to the next one.
Man, that's hard to follow, President Ramos. And I appreciate the shout out, but don't be humble. President Ramos is also getting his PhD, and the focus of his dissertation is this work right here. So we've got a truly committed board, and I'm excited to see that this is going to continue as I roll off. So now let's talk about what the role of the school board is. Primarily, I want to share what our role is and what our role isn't. So when we talk about Lone Star governance, there is a phrase that we like to say, and that is, student outcomes cannot change until adult behaviors change, starting with me. Not starting with we, not starting with us, starting with me. So just like President Ramos said, the common pretending, I have to look at myself and my own actions first. So the school board is our responsibility. We have we have statutory responsibilities, which are adopting a budget every year, adopting a tax rate every year, which is going to be aligned with the budget, hiring the superintendent and evaluating the superintendent, and also adopting policy. And I want to be clear that when we talk about the budget and policy, our role is adoption, not development. And that is another common misperception, that school boards do not actually, Ann Dar and I are not sitting in a room on a committee working through the budget and working through the numbers. We have a CFO who is a brilliant financial analyst and accountant, and he is the expert when it comes to numbers and money, and I'm glad for it, because we spend about $1 billion every year between our general budget and our capital improvements. So he is the one who develops that and tells us this is the budget that we need to achieve the goals that you have set for us. The same thing goes with policy. And so when we talk about the primary job of the school board is not just the job of the board, but it is the job of education in general. The reason that we exist is to improve student outcomes. It is our job to ensure that the city of Fort Worth and the residents of Fort Worth ISD have a quality education system where they can send their children and they know that their children will have the opportunities to graduate successfully and be prepared for college, career, military, and community leadership. That's it. Everything else falls in line, but that is the ultimate task that we are given as an education system. And the way that we ensure that we're doing that task is by focusing on improving student outcomes, specifically student achievement outcomes. What the board doesn't do, we don't hire superintendents, or we don't hire principals. We do hire the superintendent, but we don't hire principals. We don't hire football coaches. We don't decide which campus is going to get which new program, or how literacy instruction is delivered throughout the campus. There are educational professionals who it is their job and they are accountable for those decisions. And so the reason that this is important is that when the board gets in the way of those decisions, then it takes away the ability to hold the district accountable for the outcomes, and ultimately holding the superintendent accountable for the outcomes. So if we can go to the next slide, Jennifer. Okay, so here I'm just going to go a little bit more in depth about the role of the school board. The framework that we use is Lone Star Governance, which we've acknowledged already. Under the Lone Star Governance framework, there are 5 pillars: vision, accountability, structure, advocacy, and unity. So under vision, this is where the board adopts student outcome goals, progress measures, and constraints. We've talked about the goals. The constraints, like President Romo said, those are the places that you don't want to go. If you're getting in the Uber and you tell the Uber driver, I want to go here, but I don't want you to drive me through a lake. I don't want you to take me on toll roads. You create constraints that say this is where we don't want to go, and then the rest of the decisions are up to the driver. Accountability. The board spends at least half of its time on improving student outcomes, evaluates, but does not interfere with progress towards improving student outcomes. This includes conducting quarterly evaluations for quarterly evaluations for ourselves, evaluating the superintendent once a year, and then monitoring progress once a quarter, at least once a quarter, on all of the individual goal progress measures that we have. And this is the most important part. So the board has adopted a progress monitoring calendar, and this is publicly available. Anyone can look at it, and it is, the reason it's so great is because you, the public, can go look at it and know this on this date in 2000, April 2021, or April 2022 at this point, the school board is going to be talking about third grade literacy. And we will be discussing the goals and the progress that we've made. So it increases transparency and ensures that everyone knows, everyone being the staff, the board, the community, when we will be monitoring and evaluating this progress. And then we have our structure. So we operate in a way that allows the superintendent to accomplish his vision. This means that we have conducted a policy diet, that we're not adopting policy that is prescriptive or that is crossing the line from governance to management. That we have a meeting structure that is consistent and that we are staying on topic with our agendas, and that the technical aspects of the way that the board is structured and how we operate are all in line. And then we have advocacy, which is what we're doing tonight, going out into the community and talking about vision and values. This is not just an opportunity for us to talk to you, but it's also an opportunity for us to hear from you. So we will have questions and we will answer your questions. And it's important to note that this is just the beginning of this conversation. This is the first series of these that we've done, but ideally, these meetings go on in perpetuity. At least once, once or twice a year, is I think the suggested frequency to host meetings like this, where you have a two-way flow of information. And I know that we all look forward to being able to doing these in person so that we can really have more in-depth and comprehensive conversations about our goals and the vision and value of our community. And then finally is unity. This is where the board works collaboratively and with the superintendent to lead towards the vision. This involves making all board members agreeing that that we are going to adhere to a common governance model, that our job is to evaluate the superintendent and then hold the superintendent accountable, but to not get into the minutia. And then also the agreement that we as a board, that it's my job as a board member to represent all of Fort Worth ISD, not just my one member district that elects me, that I am as accountable for the outcomes of students in District 1 or District 6 or District 5, just as much as I am in District 9. I think so having done one of these before, we had a lot of questions about this, so I want to make sure that we clarify it. When we evaluate the superintendent, the goals that are created for the superintendent are indistinguishable from the goals that are created for the school, for the district. So the student outcome goals that we set, the ones that say we're going to go from X% of students reading on grade level in third grade in 2021 to Y% of students in the third grade reading on grade level by 2024, that is how he is evaluated. If he does not hit those goals, then it's a very different conversation than if he does. And so because of COVID, we have actually been able to adopt we've been able to pivot so that we are still able to monitor and evaluate even without the STAR test. So it's a great move that I'm not counting on that high stakes test to evaluate progress in our district. And so with that, we'll move on to Trustee Dar, who will talk more in depth about our goals.
All this build up and now you're excited. What are these goals? And here they are. So let's look at the three goals that the trustees have established in conjunction with the leadership team and with Dr. Scribner have established for Fort Worth ISD. The first goal is early literacy. It's to increase the percentage of third grade students who score at meets grade level or above on the STAR reading from 34% to 47% by August of 2024. And that's a huge increase for a district the size of Fort Worth. That is a significant number. And that's also a number that the staff agreed, we can do this. We're going to make this happen. The second goal is early math. Increase the percentage of third grade students who score at meets grade level or above on STAR mathematics from 34 to 45% by August of 2024. And then the third goal is college, career, and military readiness. We will increase the percentage of students graduating with a college, career, or military readiness indicator from 43% to 48% by August of 2024. I think it's really important to note that college, career, and military readiness encompasses all of secondary school, middle school, and high school. There are college and career and military readiness initiatives happening in the middle schools as well as in the high school. And I know that in years past, we had a goal that was middle years math, that focused on middle years math. And what became apparent is that if you don't have strong elementary school math, then you're not going to be as likely to improve middle school math. So to work on those mathematics skills in elementary school is critical. So a key component of Lone Star governance is constraints. They're called constraints, and that helps us to maintain our focus on student outcomes. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples. An example of a board constraint is tracking the use of time in meetings to ensure the majority of time is spent on student outcome goals. And another example is not trying to perform the roles of the superintendent. The superintendent does the superintendent's job. The trustees are to do the job of the trustees and not the job of the superintendent. So that's a constraint on the board. An example of a constraint on the superintendent is to ensure low-performing campuses have equitable access to resources and to not allow adult convenience or preference to take priority over student academic success. So that's a superintendent constraint. All of this is fancy language. It's important language, but the nitty-gritty is how do we make this happen? And so what's happening in Fort Worth ISD to make sure that we are working toward these goals? Several examples are that we now have an instructional and a literacy framework, and that means that there's a common definition of what quality instruction looks like in Fort Worth ISD. It looks the same across the district as opposed to in different parts of the district or on different campuses. We have reading academies and teacher flex day opportunities so that teachers can continue to learn. Assessment plan is tightly aligned to the nationally normed standards, and Fort Worth ISD has shifted to utilizing the NWEA, which is the Northwest Education. Hold on, I'm gonna get stuck on that one. The Northwest Evaluation Assessment. Thank you. I'm sorry about that. The Northwest Evaluation Assessment for both reading and math skills. We have aligned school feeder patterns. This is huge. And already we're seeing the benefits of having true feeder patterns so that the instruction can begin at the pre-K level and work its way all the way up to the high school level. And we have parent engagement and student support departments, who are working with community partners to re-engage and recapture enrollment loss. So if we can move to the next slide, please. This is a call to action, and this isn't a call to action for the board. This is a call to action for the community, because this model of governance doesn't work without the community's involvement and the community's support. How can you as a parent, as a community member, support improved student outcomes? So I want to draw your attention to the cute picture in the middle, and up on the screen, it's what Ashley mentioned earlier today. Student outcomes don't change until adult behaviors change, starting with me. So how can we do this? The first way is awareness. Know the goals as a parent and as a community member. Know the goals and how our progress is measured. Understand how your child's campus and or school community goals are connected to our district-wide goals. What the awareness, you can look, there's some websites over here. You'll notice that all of them start with www.fortworthisd.org/ and then it says Lone Star Gov. So that's a good way to find it on the website. The second way is engagement. And engagement is when you as a parent and as a community member connect with your child's campus and or school community via parent-teacher organizations, volunteering, site-based decision-making teams and or partnerships. We want your feedback. Provide that feedback through the Let's Talk on the website or through district stakeholder surveys. So those are all great ways for you as a community member or as a parent to become engaged, because when the more engaged the parents are, the better our school district is going to be and the stronger our community will be. Next slide, please, Jennifer.
Thank you, trustees. I am having a bit of a technical issue. If you allow me one moment. I'm going to see if I can get this fixed. Well, do one of you mind saying something to see if I can hear you?
Testing. Can
Yes.
you hear me now?
Okay.
Okay, good.
I can hear you. I was winging that a little bit with the help of someone texting me during the presentation to advance the slides. So I didn't know that that would work so well during our Q&A session. So thank you for that. But let's get right into it because we do have some time to talk. And you know, we've gotten a few questions in the chat, but let's start off with just a couple of comments that we received right off the top. We have our first comment is, I feel that all students need to be virtual next year and all schools, all school year, because I feel that students are getting better grades. We appreciate that comment. We know feedback is very important part of this loop in sharing information. Next, Lisa says, this is great information about what the school board is responsible for and what they are not. I think there is a lot of misinformation out there with parents. Thanks for this. So I just think it shows how important it is to get this information out there to our community. The information will be shared on our district website. We already have the past two meetings up. That can be found at www.fwisd.org/LoneStarGov. We put that in the chat for everyone. Our next question is about STAR testing next year. I know that, you know, y'all don't have control over that. But you know, that's something that we have to wait for the state to tell us what they're doing. Here's a great one from Alex. In the realm of accountability, reports often drill down to outcomes by race, ethnicity, and sometimes income. Few reports address outcomes by gender. Why is this too often left out when we know females are one of the most overlooked demographics?
So I'll jump on that one. So there are, depending on what you're looking at. So kind of the gold standard in Texas is the STAR test, because that's the one that everybody takes. The STAR test. So if you go to the TEA website, you can look at STAR data, and they do have it broken out more in depth. But I believe that they include by gender on some of the reports that they provide. But there are other tests that they're not the STAR test, but they're nationally normed assessments like the MAPS test and the NAEP assessment. So it's the National Assessment for Progress in Education. I think that's it. And that is the gold standard across the nation. And it's not So the good thing about the NAEP is that it is not a high stakes test. It is given every 2 years, and it actually, so we are part of the TUDA program, which is the Trial Urban District Assessment. And as part of that program, Council of the Great City Schools, which they're the administrators of the program, actually take all of our data that we get from the NAEP, and they compare it, they break it down by just an incredible number of, they disaggregate it in all sorts of different ways. And it's really incredible to look through that and see how we compare not just to other districts in Texas, but to other urban districts across the nation. Because there are, Fort Worth and Austin are not really, we're close to the same size and we're both in the same state, but our tax bases are very different. And, but you can look at Fort Worth and Cleveland, Ohio, and you have a much more, consistent, tax base. But again, the demographics are different between Cleveland and Fort Worth. So you can look, and they break the information down in really interesting ways. And, we only get it every 2 years, but it's still a great piece of data to look at and see how our schools are doing. So, one of the great things about moving to evaluating our progress on the maps is that it's not 100% STAR test. And so it takes a little bit of the burden off of our educators to, it removes some of those high stakes that we think about.
Thank you, Ashley. And the next question is about kids with learning differences. How do they fit into our accountability and what's measured?
Do you mind if I take that one? So my background is actually as a special educator, and I am passionate about making sure that students with disabilities do receive those services. They are not specifically addressed in our goals, but that does not mean that they are not counted, because they are just as important as every other student in the school district. And when we look at these overall percentages for Fort Worth ISD, and we're looking at those objectives for the district as a whole, all of those students with disabilities, without disabilities, those students who are identified as gifted and talented, those students who are English learners, every single student in the district is counted in those scores, or is included in those scores. So when we set a goal that says that students in 3rd grade are going to meet or be above the passing standard for STAR, then that also includes those students with disabilities. And that's when it then becomes the superintendent's job to work with the team of professionals and professional educators and educational experts in Fort Worth ISD to design programs for students with disabilities, for students who are English learners, for students who are GT, for all the students in Fort Worth ISD, to make sure that their needs are being met. So they're included in these goals because these are overarching goals for the entire district, but every student is counted, including those students with disabilities. It's not the board's job to put those programs in place. It's the board's job to make sure that we establish the goals so that then the superintendent knows what's being measured and where our focus is, and so that the superintendent and the superintendent's team and the staff of Fort Worth ISD recognize reading is important and math is important, and that college and career and military readiness is important. So we need to be focusing on that, and we need to make sure that we are addressing those student outcomes. It's a good question. Thank you.
Thank you. And a nice segue to the next question, which deals with the military readiness. Since it was discussed as part of one of the goals that the board is measuring, previously the metric has been to enlist. That's the metric for, so we never see a number on ROTC or military academy enrollment. And as a high school teacher, our friend Alex, most of my students never get info on ROTC or academy options. This needs to be addressed. So does anyone want to add anything? Because I know that the military readiness is newer to the college and career out of House Bill 3.
So I think that's something that I don't have an answer and I don't have a solution to that, but this is where community involvement comes in. To bring this to our attention, because there's no way that the board or Dr. Scribner or the leadership team can know everything that's going on every campus. And that we all have email addresses that are accessible through the website. I welcome your feedback. We welcome that that feedback so that then I can help get somebody involved that can then make some changes to how that happens. So shoot me an email and I'm happy to connect you with the person that can make that happen. And that's where that community involvement comes in.
Thank you. And one of the questions that came up on Monday was, and you may have touched on this when I couldn't hear you, so apologize for that, but I don't think it hurts to reiterate. Does TEA mandate Lone Star governance? I thought that was something that was really important for everyone to understand how it came to be at Fort Worth ISD.
Cinto, do you want to take that one, or do you want me to?
Yeah, I mean, the quick answer is that no, it's not mandated. It's recommended, it's offered. Initially, I myself thought that Lone Star governance was being mandated on school districts that were failing or that had a lot of problems in their districts, but that's not the case. So yeah, no, it's not mandated. I do think that the boards that are trying to be cutting edge and trying to find alignment, because I'll just be real, right? That the number one selling book at conferences for school board members tend to revolve around dysfunctional school boards and superintendents. And then the average tenure of a superintendent nationally is usually less than 3 years. And so, there's direct board behaviors that are impacting student outcomes by ways of how we conduct ourselves in the boardroom with one another. So no, it's not mandated, but I do think that there are more and more districts that are subscribing to this idea of at least having a framework on learning how to operate and how to work together.
Thank you. And another comment, thank you, trustees, for your commitment and ownership regarding student outcomes. Your modeling of this responsibility is inspiring. It is in our hands to create change. Thank you. And I think, there are some questions in the chat, and there have been this week, that kind of ride the line between, where administration comes in to make recommendations that you may have to vote on. And maybe if you could just kind of go over that process again. I know, Jacinto, you used the analogy of the Uber or the Lyft. But we've got a couple of questions in here about extended calendar, about potential staff cuts, and what if our attendance comes back, and how does that move along? I know there are some questions the last few days about adoption of certain curriculum or strategies. So can you just talk a little bit more about that process?
Yeah, so when we have, this has been, I would say that this is like one of the hardest things for board members to deal with. I will say that for me, it was one of the hardest things for me to deal with, because I had to look at my actions and the way that I respond to these kinds of questions. So, that I would love to say, oh no, don't worry about the school calendar next year. We're not going to do anything to it. The board's we're going to hold the line, and we're going to, make sure that that might be great. That might be, it might make me sound like I'm there and I'm putting up the good fight, but really that's not my decision to make. If the superintendent and our administration look at the progress that we are making and look at they're the ones with the whole picture, and they're the ones that determine the strategy. And if they come to the board, and I won't be on the board at that point, but if they come to the board and say, we need to extend the school year, or we need to, do X, Y, and Z so that we can reach our goals, which, remember, the goals are helping students achieve in their educational progress. If they come to the board and say, we need to do this, then it is the board's responsibility to ask questions, to understand what they're asking for, but ultimately to go along, not go along with them, but to support what it is that they need to do. On the other side of the coin, you can't just support it blindly and just let it go. You have to have that consistent accountability as you're monitoring progress and as you're doing those annual evaluations. If the tax dollars are being spent to invest in strategies, then our taxpayers need to know that they're getting a return on their investment. And really, we call it a return on achievement, because it's or a return on instruction, which is achievement. So, it is, I look really, really good as a board member when I, get a phone call and I answer that phone call, and I, will listen and go on. And yes, I agree with you. We're going to get that football coach hired back at this school, and he should have never been terminated in the first place. And that's just an ambiguous example. It's not a real thing. It makes me look good, but that type of behavior is toxic to our school board and to our education system, because it's typically not just one board member doing it. It's typically 9 board members doing it. And you have 9 different competing interests, and you have 9 different people telling the superintendent how to do his job. And that's not good for anyone. And usually when board members get stuck in the minutia, the people that get damaged are the kids.
Thank you. And yeah, this goes back to, I think someone, here's a very specific example. Someone asked in the chat, what role does the board have in the decision regarding continuation of virtual option as part of the traditional classroom for next year?
That's a good question. And there are a lot of variables that factor into that decision that are completely outside of Fort Worth ISD's control. And one of those is whether or not TEA will even consider virtual education as a school day. That's going to be on TEA and what that looks like. And so the district, Fort Worth ISD, is going to be dependent on whatever TEA decides as far as whether or not virtual learning is still permitted, and if so, what the design of that virtual learning looks like. Other factors that factor into that are going to be the local Tarrant County Health Department, because we have to follow the protocols established by the health department, but then also the CDC. Where are they, and where are we as a nation in what the recommendations are regarding virtual learning and being back together in person? So unfortunately, that's an answer that's kind of a non-answer, because there's so many variables that, and it's frustrating. I'm a planner. I want to know what to expect. I want to be able to write it down on my calendar. I want to be able to cross it off when it's done. And it's hard to plan in the midst of a pandemic, especially when you're the size of Fort Worth ISD. So patience and grace and understanding are appreciated. The Dr. Scribner and the leadership staff will determine. It's not the board's job to determine what that virtual learning looks like, if that virtual learning happens, how the virtual learning is organized or structured. It's Dr. Scribner's job to make sure that he has a team in place to make that happen. That is the professional educator's job. it would be our job as a board to approve a plan if needed. So that would be our job, or to not approve a plan. That's where the board comes in, is the governance level of that. But that's a good question. And it's a question on lots of people's mind. And I wish there was a hard, firm answer, but it's going to take some time. And again, Fort Worth ISD is dependent on outside entities in order to make sure that that decision is made and made well. What I do know is that the leadership team and Dr. Scribner are putting together lots of different options that depending on what comes up. So we're not just starting this process. They're not just starting this process when the decision is made, because then we wouldn't have enough time, or they wouldn't have enough time to get it put in place.
Thank you, Trustee Dar.
Can I do one more thing real quick? That was a question that you asked earlier about the high schools and the construction on the high schools. Those projects are the board does not oversee those projects. All of those projects are actually ahead of schedule. And that was a plus of COVID, because they've been able to do the construction that they wouldn't have been able to do if those schools had been full, or if we hadn't had the time in the spring when the governor closed all campuses in Texas. So that work continued, and so they're actually ahead of schedule. And everything about the construction projects can be found on the CIP website, and in Fort Worth ISD website under CIP. And it's beautiful. Go look at it, because it's a beautiful website, and you can click on every single school and see pictures and updates and get the information that you're looking for there.
Thank you. We have had a couple of questions about staff cuts and possible staff cuts that have come up. And again, I think, this is again one of those questions that I think is more of that administrator side, as they look at that. But is there anything that anyone wants to comment about that? And what the difficulty of the district losing so many students this year?
I think this is a good time to say that personnel matters are not board matters. And I get emails sometimes that deal with personnel matters, and I respond that this is not a governance issue. This is a personnel matter, and I cannot get involved. Meanwhile, if the numbers do go down, and if there are fewer positions in Fort Worth ISD, attrition is going to take care of some of that. Teachers who are retiring, teachers who move, teachers, staff, not just teachers, but staff as well, who have a baby and decide to stay home, whatever the life experience is that's going on. So attrition will take care of some of that, but that is not the job of the board. That is the job of Dr. Scribner and the leadership team and the campus principals and all of the administrators.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. Because I do think, it is that area where y'all do get a lot of questions about all kinds of things. But through this process of Lone Star governance, and really putting it out there where that line is, appreciate that from you.
Yeah.
So
Jennifer, can I just add one more thing onto Anne's answer, because I think it's important for this. So one of the when we talk about things like class sizes, as Anne mentioned, that's a personnel matter. It's also part of the strategy that our administration determines. The staffing and class sizes are definitely things that influence student outcomes. So it's important to note that these are things that our administration does look at, and there is pretty concrete data that refers to, or that indicates that class size alone is not an indicator in improving student outcomes. And this is one of the things that, that is something for our administrative team to understand. And, and also just ensuring that it doesn't mean that class size doesn't matter, and understanding that people need to know that, because class size does matter, but there are other things that are bigger, that have bigger impacts, that might be higher, that might be more specific to the needs of Fort Worth ISD. And so the class size that is set by the state of Texas is actually, if you look at like the Hattie research and visible learning, they're all aligned with that, with the data and what that says.
Thank you. Well, it is 6:56 p.m. I do want to be considerate of everyone's time tonight. Board members, do you have any final thoughts before we end the meeting?
I do. Part of the reason why we're doing this is so that our community at large can be well informed on what trustees should or should be doing. The data points that we are reviewing as a board, actually, let me reframe this. What is true for me is that I've been on this board 8 years, and I am just now as responsible and complicit to the data points that have not shifted. Because as I started off, I came in focused with my own agenda of improving mariachi, athletics, parent engagement. And while I would make the argument that that has improved in my single member district, that didn't necessarily impact student outcomes. That definitely didn't impact third grade reading, early years math, middle years math, and college and career readiness. If anything, I probably distracted the board and the superintendent administrative team, which is not okay by me. So I didn't know any better coming in. The journey began for me in January 2017. The hopes are that not only us as a board stay committed to this work, which I believe we will. The other part is anyone who's running or who wants to run for this board, that they be clear of what this looks like. I'm looking forward to the day that people are not making campaign promises that are going to be conflicting with the overall agenda of this board, which is to change those data points. That our young people, we say we're all fighting for kids. I know we are, but we can't fight in so many different ways that we don't get results for students. So just to be clear as to why we're doing this, Lone Star Governance, the framework, understands that we have got to educate our greater community so that somebody like me, I ran on those things. I remember the night of the campaign of the win. And I remember stepping back saying, holy smokes, I really have no idea what a school board member is supposed to do, but I'll figure it out because I love kids and I'm here as a youth minister and all of that. That hopefully is going to die out pretty soon. That human beings are entering this space, speaking a common language, much like what we're subscribing to here.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Sure, I'll go. I thank you, President Ramos. I appreciate that. I think it's important to note that all of the comments in the chat, there's no way to address every single comment in the chat, but they are being recorded so that then they can be included in, is it an FAQ that's being put together? How are those going to be shared, Jennifer?
Yes, we're looking at doing an FAQ on the Lone Star Governance page, which we put in the chat. The recorded videos for Monday and Tuesday are already up. So this one will be up tomorrow, and then Thursdays will be up on Friday. So.
Okay. All right. Thank you. My final comments are that it is an honor and a privilege to serve as, and I represent District 6, but I serve every student, every family, every teacher in the community of Fort Worth, not just District 6. And it is a privilege to do that. And I appreciate that opportunity. I also want to say that Lone Star Governance and the work that is done through Lone Star Governance, it is an investment in students. And an investment in students is never a bad investment. That is, in my opinion, Personally, I'll speak for myself. The best investment any community can ever make is in its children and its youth. And I appreciate the fact that Lone Star Governance provides a framework. Student achievement and improvement does not happen by accident. It happens because we're intentional, and it happens because we're purposeful and we are committed to making it happen. And I like the Lone Star Governance framework because it provides that intentionality that we need in order to make sure that student outcomes improve. Because that's what we're here for, is the students. If we lose focus on the students, we've really lost sight of the ball. So again, it's an honor, it's a privilege. I appreciate you spending an hour with us this evening. I know your time is valuable, and thank you for engaging in this work, because we cannot do this work alone. We must do it together. Thank you.
And it's 7 o'clock, so I'll keep this quick, at least as quick as I can. So I just want to say that, and go back to our main idea that student outcomes don't change until adult behaviors change, starting with me. And I have 24 days left on the school board, and it is a bittersweet moment for me, because this was kind of like the cherry on top of the last 8 years, working towards getting our school board to, focused on outcomes, and, really pushing the mission of Lone Star Governance. And, and I feel like it is, it's almost like a ministry. You have to constantly be talking about it, and everywhere you go, and constantly be informing people and educating people. And this is a new way of doing things in Fort Worth ISD and in education altogether. And so these conversations, we're calling them conversations about governance, but really at the end of the day, it's a conversation about student achievement. And it's so important for us to have, all of the people. We have 57 participants on this call right now, and that's incredible. The fact that 57 people have decided to spend their Wednesday evening with us right in the middle of dinner time to learn about how they can improve student outcomes and be a partner with Fort Worth ISD. And so this is just the beginning of many more conversations to come. And I look forward to being able to be on the other side of the table for those future conversations. But this is, you can't, the school board behaviors need to change, but also including our community, and just repositioning all of it, the way that we interact all together. So thank you all so much for being here tonight.
Yes, and just of note, we had up to 63, I think, on Facebook earlier, because we are streaming Facebook Live. So we had a lot of people join us there as well. But yes, just to reiterate, thank you, everyone. Thank you, trustees, for holding these conversations. We have had a lot of great conversation this week. And so we still have one more event tomorrow. It will be in Spanish, but if you would like to tune in, there will be an English interpreter there as well. So tell your friends, tell your neighbors, anyone and everyone can join in on this conversation. Tell your kids, because this is our high school meeting tonight. So we're looking forward to another great conversation tomorrow. Thank you so much, and have a good evening.